Again, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Mitchell Warren, the director of AVAC, and it is so exciting to have a webinar with someone who is a driver of science and policy, but it's actually even more fun to do it with someone who I regard as a mentor and a friend in Jeanne Marrazzo. I know many on the line will know her, and others of you know of her. I hope in the next 30 minutes, everyone feels like they have a great sense of who is now leading one of the most important health research institutes, frankly, in the world, as the new director, or not so new director, of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Jeanne Marrazzo, I'm not going to go through a full bio for Jeanne, but she comes to us, comes to NIAID most recently from the University of Alabama, where she led infectious disease, the infectious disease department there. Has a long-standing history back in Seattle at the University of Washington, where she led an enormous portfolio of cutting-edge science around HIV, around sexually transmitted infections, around infectious disease generally. And there's so much more I could say. You can actually Google, it's on the NIAID homepage. You can read her whole bio. But Jeanne and I agreed that going through the bio was not the best use of our time. I will just say up front that because of the limited time, this is I've crowdsourced a lot of questions from many of you on the line, and thank you for sharing those. We'll get to some. Undoubtedly, there are going to be many more, and hopefully many more opportunities on calls like this and on in-person meetings to be able to talk with her about what the future looks like. But before we kick off, Jeanne, maybe I'll just say, is there anything about your bio, whether written on the NIAID page or not, that you would want people to kind of know about you as they come to know you as the director of NIAID?
Yes, of course. But first, let me say thank you. I feel the same way about you. You've always been a shining star for me in terms of setting the standard for community engagement in person-centered research and work in the community. So it's really wonderful to be here. And I want to emphasize and pick up on one thing you said, Mitchell, which is that this is, I hope, the first of many conversations. We have a lot of work to do. So I'll just emphasize that. Something on my bio or my CV that I would like to emphasize, probably that I take great pride in mentoring. So I have a lot of mentees, and I think that was one of the hardest things about leaving academics, and I'm hoping that I can replicate that at NIH. So to me, and I will talk about this a little bit, making sure we have a healthy group of folks to carry this work forward after we all retire is really a passion of mine. So that's a really important thing. Back to you.
I love that. And I think about the number of people that I get to work with in the research world who worked with you, studied under you, and it really is such a terrific example. You are officially the 6th director of NIAID. And just yesterday, perfect timing for this conversation, just yesterday, NIAID posted on its website a request for information, inviting comments and suggestions for the new NIAID strategic plan. So obviously, NIAID has huge commitments on the ground with researchers, with trials, with product development partnerships, but you now are embarking on a new strategic plan. I'd love to hear kind of the process in your mind and priorities and what you hope kind of comes out of this so early in your tenure.
Yeah, thank you. So just to orient people, NIAID as a whole, so remember this is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Immunology and Infectious Diseases, has not had a comprehensive strategic plans process since 2016, 2017, was due to happen around 2022. And of course, events intervened. There have been other strategic plans for things like pandemic preparedness, antimicrobial resistance, herpes simplex virus, for example. But this is the first time in a while where we are planning to do a deep dive to kind of pivot to, I would say, the next 10 years. It's supposed to be a
Mm,
5-year strategic plan, but I really think we should think about what we can accomplish in a really big way in the next decade. And I'm thinking things that are kind of getting closer to our reach, which I'm happy to talk
mm,
about, largely around TB, malaria, and frankly, really, really seriously making a dent in HIV incidence across the world. So I think it's a really exciting time, and I want to emphasize the need to have community engagement in this,
mm.
because I want this to be a very external facing process. I don't want it to be us sitting in a room, dreaming up the coolest quote unquote laboratory science. As I've said many times before, if we don't get the products that we make to the people who need them and the communities that need them, we really haven't done our job. So please take a look at the request for information. I know you'll get it out on your networks, but we would really love to talk to people. We would like to have listening sessions once people have a chance to review the RFI. And I think there's going to be a lot that we can talk about and really think bold.
Mm. I love that idea of thinking bold. One of the things that you said that in that is this issue of getting products to people, not just
Hmm.
developing them.
Hmm.
And I think any of us on the line think back, there are hardly any advances in HIV or TB that haven't actually somehow traced their roots back to NIAID investments, whether that was
Hmm.
early upstream research or even very large efficacy trials, for example, HP 1008, 3084 of cabotegravir. So often we think of NIAID as kind of the generator of those ideas and the trials, but you just described how do we get them to people? And obviously there are huge gaps, huge delays. 14 years ago, NIAID funded the first oral prep trials, and we haven't even
Hmm.
begun to make the dent in oral prep.
Hmm.
How do we do it differently? And we as a global community, but particularly thinking about you now as the head of NIAID, what's the research agenda to translate that into impact?
Yeah, it's really a great question, and I know you and I have talked about how there are still so many gaps in adoption of tools that we know work, and as you pointed out, these can be structural, they can be individual decisions. I just want to sort of highlight my experience having come from the Deep South in the last 7 years. I would say the biggest really killer, if without being
Mm,
dramatic, is stigma, because we have excellent tools for, I mean,
mm,
prep works really well, right? But to access prep requires so many steps to self-realization, self-actualization, and actually, access. And that
mm,
is really, really, really tough when stigma is encountered pretty much at every step. So I think the question is, does NIAID and does NIH really want to lean into that implementation science end of the spectrum? A lot of people think implementation science is quote unquote, not basic research. I don't really want to argue about it. I really just want to make sure that we go from discovery to implementation
mm,
and delivery. And I do think that we should be thinking about the same tools that we use to wield precision science, often,
mm,
discussed in in the context of vaccines and antibodies, to personalized prevention. I mean, really,
mm.
there's no reason we can't go with the same rigor and the same inquisitiveness and the same commitment. I think that that's something we really need to talk about and understand what that looks like for sure in the next
Mm.
5 to 10 years, or we're really not going to get where we need to be.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic to hear because I think very often we see kind of R&D, basic science through to
Mm.
R&D of new products in one area, and then somehow it's meant to be handed off to someone else to do delivery. And
Mhm.
clearly the handoff isn't working. And for NIAID to figure out a role within that would be awesome.
Well, and I think also, I mean, you saw it with COVID vaccines, right? I think as biomedical, and I'm fully a biomedical scientist, right? I can hum a few
Mm.
bars around socio-behavioral research, as you know. But, I feel like, especially in the biomedical sector, we really have an arrogance, that says, look, we made this beautiful thing for you. We are
Mm.
telling you how great it works. Have at it, go for
Yeah,
it. And I just don't think I'm not sure there were ever really days where that was true.
yeah.
But now it's definitely not that way. So I think we've got to face it, embrace it, and just try to figure out how to work together.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And it's certainly where I think a lot of our advocacy at AVAC sits, and delighted to partner with you and all of your colleagues in that. One of the areas that NIAID certainly most recently has been a leader in is around longer acting technologies. Obviously, 083 and 084 for PrEP, but just last week you announced positive results from the Latitude study of cabin or pivirine for treatment. How excited are you, and what do you think is next for long acting,
Yeah,
both
I'm
treatment and
super.
prevention?
Yeah, I'm super excited because I think that we are getting into an era where we are again defining one pole of the choice spectrum,
Mm,
right? So a long-acting method maybe gets you 6 months, and I think I'm very excited about lenacapavir coming into the studies that are about to happen or getting now really starting to enroll. I think when we transition to the potential for a non-parenteral long-acting product like a pill, that will
mm,
be pretty amazing. My not concern, but what I keep wanting to have a dialogue about, there really are people who see these products as the equivalent of a vaccine, right? It's like,
mm,
use it and forget it, right? You put it in, you never have to worry, people don't have to come back. I think that's great, but that is not going to work for everybody. It's especially
mm,
not going to work for people who, again, coming back to women who want to get pregnant, do want to conceive, maybe don't know what their next 6 months is going to be like, and we can come back to those things. I really think that you need a spectrum of products available that reflect the spectrum of people's
mm,
experience of encountering the potential of getting the virus, right? So a lot of people, as you and I have discussed, don't plan sex. They may not even have any purchase over how sex happens. They may not ever even have the opportunity to define what happens during sex.
mm,
So to have products where people can be protected in all of those situations, I think should be a very, very healthy,
mm,
goal. So you've asked me before about on-demand products. Of course, we need on-demand products, and we need products that last as long as possible, right?
mm,
The holy grail, of course, is a vaccine where you would get ideally lifelong protection. But you really got to sort of work your way backwards and think
yeah.
about every encounter that carries the potential for acquiring the virus or acquiring, you name it. I think we've got to think about optimizing people's sense of wellness and
Mm.
sense of power and self-determination to not get infected at every opportunity. So I do think that there is a role for a spectrum of products.
I mean, it's terrific to hear, because I think with every new product, people, and particularly product developers, understandably become the champions for their product, and as if it's the product. And certainly, I think we believe there is no one product, and so this idea that longer acting is essential but not sufficient, and so clearly a role for short acting non-systemic methods continue, which I
I
think
think
is
so.
reassuring to hear from the head of NIAID. One of the areas too, and that you were part of in the days of the microbicide trial network, was to think not only about HIV prevention, but thinking about the user. And one of the areas that has led to around multipurpose technologies, the ability to link
Hmm.
HIV prevention with contraception or with STI prevention, or
Hmm.
ultimately something in combination. Well, where does that sit? Because obviously some of those areas of research and science may be outside of NIAID, but is there a role for NIAID to really kind of think about a multi-purpose technology agenda and portfolio?
So definitely in my mind, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately. The regulatory pathway for MPTs or multi-prevention technologies is complicated, but we have accomplished and gotten over complicated things before. I think
Mm,
if we take this on and really work with regulatory agents, we could probably do it. I think that, the concept of a purely HIV focused prevention method to me is sort of still a little we need it, but it's also very disease focused. And in some ways,
mm,
I feel like it reflects, the early days of the HIV epidemic when we really had to think about HIV almost as a modern entity because we had so little to offer people.
mm,
We're now in a place where people are living with HIV and a bunch of other things. People are living with
yeah,
HIV and have or are at risk for getting things like STIs or having an unintended
mm,
pregnancy. So to me, MPTs are a natural outgrowth of considering people as a whole person, as
mm,
opposed to considering somebody as somebody who has name the infection.
yeah,
And that's it sounds subtle, but it is a very big shift because when you make that shift, you've really got to meet people where they're at
yeah,
and sort of say, okay, yes, I'm living with HIV, but I also, don't really want to get gonorrhea tomorrow or tonight,
yeah,
or, I'm really freaked out because I've been exposed to syphilis. What do I do? So all these things I think are um, as I've said many times before, sexual health is human health. And
yeah.
if you're dealing with a sexually transmitted infection like HIV, these things have to be considered together. So I think it's kind of this more comprehensive infectious disease look at people,
Mm,
and really a goal to try to help them prevent or manage, depending on what's going on,
sure.
whatever's going on, and not just sort of saying, oh, this person has HIV, this person doesn't. We go different paths.
Well, and I was going to ask you because, of course, much of your career was really around sexually transmitted infections, and you've
Hmm.
been a leader in that, in addition to work around HIV. And very often, STI and HIV programs have been in parallel.
Hmm.
Many STI researchers became HIV leaders in HIV, and STIs kind of got left behind. And so I think you clearly already began to answer that. But what is the connective tissue, and what is the vision? And perhaps it is that sexual health framing writ large.
I think it is. I also think that with the advances, well, two things. First of all, the epidemiology is pretty disturbing right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we had over 250 newborns with congenital syphilis in the United States in 2022. Actually, no, I'm sorry, over 250 deaths,
Mm,
either stillborn or actually born with congenital syphilis and succumbed, and over 3,500 cases in women. What the overlap of HIV in that group is, I don't know yet, but I have no doubt that women who are not able to access prenatal care and coming in with this
mm,
outcome are at very vulnerable. They're very vulnerable in so many ways. That on top of the numbers of infections that we're seeing of gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, I mean, you name it, and the number of people
mm,
living with HIV who are experiencing these outcomes. So we can't ignore it. We ignore
yeah.
it at our peril for so many reasons. The other thing is that, we've seen some really exciting advances in vaccines, right? A lot of it due to the investment that we built in the HIV vaccine world.
Yeah.
And you know that a lot of the structural biology that allowed us to understand the HIV virus, which I firmly believe is going to result in a vaccine. I don't know if it's going to be 10 years, but I do believe we will get there. I hope it's in our lifetime.
Mm,
Just had a great debrief from the ChavD folks last week, and I was really very excited about it.
mm,
But that work informed our ability to create the COVID vaccine, create the RSV vaccine, and it's now
yeah.
being applied to these other pathogens. So I think there's a future in the next 5 to 10 years where we may have some very exciting trials for
Mm.
prevention in non-HIV STIs, and that would be very good.
Yeah, no, it'd be amazing. And I was going to actually come to some of the issues related to COVID and the
Yeah.
rapidity of vaccine development, because one of the great assets that you inherit as the head of NIAID is the Vaccine Research Center, which obviously was created primarily around HIV vaccine development. And I'm curious how you think about that kind of platform technology, platform agencies that maybe
Mhm.
break out of disease silos. Is that something we can and should expect more of? And can advocates help kind of push it in that direction?
Absolutely. So, this whole concept of prototype pathogens and having a
Mm,
platform that is ready for whatever comes at you, it really grew out of the pandemic planning, right? And so, the idea is to have really study some of these agents that
mm,
are potential threats, understand what you would need to do to develop at least a prototype vaccine and ramp that up very quickly. I mean, we're talking like months as opposed to what normally would take at
yeah.
least a year, if not more. I think that that is a reality, and I think what we can do together as advocates in the scientific community is continue to advocate for the infrastructure to be ready to do that, because
Mm,
that means having robust laboratories. It means having robust dialogues with the community about what things they're concerned about, what are they hearing about.
mm,
So I think it means we can't take our foot off the gas with regard to some of the basic science and the discovery. A
Yeah.
lot of people think, well, we've gotten here, we've done this, we have a just the ability to sort of transfer these platforms to other things. It's not quite that simple, and you really want to maintain a state of readiness and also keep your commitment to HIV vaccine and cure research, which we haven't talked about yet, but that continues to require sustained investment. So I just think we can't take our eye off the ball, even though we've clearly been really diverted by the pandemic in a big way, and we're still paying the price from it. A lot of increases in cancers, infections, other things that are a
Mm.
consequence, I think, of the pandemic.
Yeah, no, we often say, we may be over the pandemic. It's not really over us, and we're seeing
No,
that. And so
no.
related to that, COVID actually obviously very much part of the NIAID research agenda from the last 4 years. As you think forward, where there'll still be the kind of long COVID research agenda, COVID and pandemic preparedness writ large embedded into NIAID going into the future?
I think there should be. I think it should be. It's always a matter of resources and how much, and what we really need to focus on. Somebody mentioned in the chat, David Bryden, that people living with HIV also get long COVID. That's another consequence of having, sort of breaking down the silos of who does or does not have HIV. Long COVID is a really big problem, and some of the research that's come out in the last couple of months looking at what happens to your brain, what happens to your muscles,
Yeah,
what happens to your lungs, your heart. It's pretty staggering, and I think that whole post-viral chronic infection, chronic inflammation situation is finally getting the look it deserves. It's again where yes, we have a National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, we have a National Heart, Lung, and Blood, we have a national this, that, and the other thing, neurological diseases, but people they live in one body
yeah,
and everything talks to each other. So I think the good thing about if there's anything good about the pandemic, it many silver linings, but one of them really is to remind people that the virus wasn't over when it was over. So many lingering things,
yeah.
both in society, biologically, socially, everything that we experienced. And so I do think that NIAID has to be front and center at the table with other people invested in this. And that's, as
Yeah.
you know, the Recover cohort has 3 chairs, me for NIAID, the NIH, National Institute of Heart, Lung, and Blood, and then the National Institute of Neurological Diseases and Stroke. So that's, I think, a great start, and it's a new model for
Yeah.
working together. So I hope that it sets a precedent that continues to yield a lot of fruit.
That's terrific. Out of curiosity, as you joined, did you get a test of all of the institute and center acronyms to be
Oh my
able to?
gosh. No, I'm still constantly stopping people and asking them what are they talking about? Like yeah, everything is an abbreviation.
Oh,
And
I thought
worse,
it was
even
just
worse.
us on the
No,
outside.
no, no, even worse, they have abbreviations that like they use it at the institute level and then they use it again at the NIH level and again it's like I don't even know what office they're talking about. It has been a steep learning curve, very steep learning curve. Probably
Well,
that's been one of the most stressful parts of the new job.
well, let me ask you about that, Jeannie. You had a thriving research program at the University of Washington. You took it to the University of Alabama. In the current political environment, the
Mhm.
idea of becoming a public servant, um, what made this job the one you wanted to take on?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people ask me that, and not always as politely as you have asked me that. Um, well, I'll start with the science part. I feel like, I mean, this is like a dream job for an infectious
Mm,
disease nerd who has always wanted to see the results of discovery make a difference for people. So I can't think of a better job. I love
mm,
infectious diseases. I love immunology, and you can make a difference from I think this vantage point.
mm,
Um, Especially with the science right now. I mean, when you look at how quickly
mm,
things are happening, we've never been at this point before. I mean, it seems obvious, but when you look at how stuff has been accelerating, look at how quickly we can learn about the structure of things like viruses. We can reverse engineer antibodies and ultimately vaccines. We're
mm.
coaxing the immune system into fighting cancers, into fighting autoimmune diseases. So I feel like we are at this incredible time. We have the potential to, I think, like, if not eliminate, really, really dramatically reduce malaria in the next
Mm,
decade with some of the monoclonal antibodies in the vaccine. So the temptation to be a part of that was just
mm,
way too exciting.
mm,
Um, and then the other thing about, the public health piece, when I look back at my career, so much of it, I mean, yes, I was a dyed-in-the-wool academic, but I always really liked service. I've served on tons of boards. I've run many meetings. I really like being in the mix. I like being engaged with people. I like trying to solve these big problems.
mm.
And so this, I think, just a great chance to jump into what some people see as a hot mess, but I see as a really exciting time that will be challenging. But if we don't
Mm.
do it, right? Who's
Who
going to do
will?
it? We've got to do it.
Right.
We've fought the fight for a long time, and I really feel passionately that we can make some really big advances in the next several years.
Well, I certainly don't want to pretend to speak for everybody on the line, but I think I probably can in saying we're so grateful that you did take this on because it's so hugely important. And as you say, the opportunities are so great to be able to do this. I know we're coming up on time and I know you have a crazy schedule, but I'd love if I can just do some rapid fire questions. And thank you, I should say also to everybody who's put questions in the Q&A in the chat. I'm not ignoring them. I'm trying to weave them in. It's hard in a half an hour. But I'm committed to getting these back to you, Jeannie, and work with you to make sure that this becomes a listening session of its own, because I think many of the issues people raised here were amazing. But some rapid fire things. Next week, you'll be in Denver at the Conference of Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections, CROI. What are you most looking forward to?
Oh, seeing everybody and seeing everybody and hearing about what they're doing and hearing about the new science. One thing about, I know this is not rapid fire answer. One thing about jobs like these is they can sometimes be a little isolating. And so the opportunity to actually spend 4 days at a scientific meeting, again, going back to the nerd part,
Yeah.
along with seeing collaborators and future investigators, people who are going to lead I mean, to me, that I don't think it gets any better than that. So that's what I'm
Well,
looking forward
And,
to.
and I love that the part about seeing younger investigators. You talked early on about your passion for mentorship. What's the one lesson you try to instill in your mentees historically? What's the nugget that, like, boom, if you can focus on this, you'll be
Mm.
successful?
Um, Always maintain your persistence, your energy, and your humility. Because if you can be persistent and humble at the same
Mm,
time, people will really understand that you really want to do something. You're open to input, and you're going to work hard at it. So I have a lot of advice. I will just stop there. So I
No,
am
I
going to be
love.
doing. I'm doing the new investigators workshop on Sunday. So I will have a little chance to talk a little bit more about that. But I think don't be afraid to ask questions and talk to people you think might
Mm,
not take the time to talk to you because
yeah.
we love it.
I think that's so important because I think often, even I think it's probably even harder now. You are the director of NIAID that has a bit of an aura, but the ability
Yes.
to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, Dr. Marrazzo, I have a question," and it doesn't
Yeah.
mean to just come from young investigators. I certainly want to encourage everybody who's an advocate, citizen scientist, that Dr. Marrazzo is our friend and is our ally in this regard.
Absolutely. And I do want to say you at one point asked me something about what I about the voice study. And I
Mm,
will say that was the crucible for me learning to work with community in a way that I had never done before. I
mm.
had some in terms of my vaginal health work. But I will say always most anxious when I'm going to be interacting with community folks because they always ask the best questions.
Mm. And I know we don't have a ton of time. The voice study is such a pioneering study, one of the most, at the time, most complex prep trial design. It has huge implications. I know Bill asked a question about trial designs of the future. It had amazing community engagement. It was one of the trials that we look to at AVAC as the leading good participatory practice role model. How do we do that? It is not so much of a rapid fire question. I apologize. How do we do that more? And again, that was so important because the voice results were disappointing. It didn't get the result
Yeah.
we wanted, and yet
Yeah.
communities were there with you.
Yeah.
What's the message for the future there?
It's about time, commitment, and money, right? So, like, we in the investigators, the scientists, everybody had to make the time
Mm,
to create the opportunities for everybody to get together and have enough time in a safe, good environment to talk through the issues. So this is
Yeah.
not something you do in 30 minutes on a webinar, right? As
Yeah.
good as fun as this is something where you take a couple days and you go through questions about the protocol. You go through even before the protocol, right? This is about questions about the priorities and the scientific direction,
Mm,
which is again coming back to the strategic planning. One of the reasons it's really important to hear from people, because what I think is important may really not resonate with many of the people who need
yeah.
the intervention the most.
Yeah. Amazing. Want to figure out it takes time and money, and now you sit at the head of NIAID. There's a pot of money. Is there one study or trial that if you could would be the thing you'd most want to do?
Oh my goodness. Now you're asking me to, that's like choosing among my favorite children. And since I don't have human children, choosing among my favorite dogs. I can't do that.
Want them all.
Um, all right. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I was gonna say, because of who is here at the table, that I would love to lead a comprehensive biobehavioral HIV
Ooh.
prevention study that really maximized the opportunity for people to choose what they would like to
Mm.
work for them and give them. I mean, this has been done on a smaller scale with like the ring and oral prep, but really give them a choice of methods in a setting where they were able to access them. And I would like to see no HIV infections at the end of it, because there would be no placebo and everybody would be so happy with the product that they chose that we would have no HIV infections. That would be
You
my
know,
dream.
Jeannie, that is a dream that I hope as advocates we can help realize, because that is what the world needs. And I couldn't have thought of a better answer. And one of the things, and we didn't get into the fact of one of the big parts of this job for you is about being a science communicator. But you clearly knew your audience. But that is the trial I think it's safe to say everybody on this line would want. And we work with a number of civil society partners in East and Southern Africa who launched last year the Choice Manifesto. And what you just described
Yes.
is
Yes,
the
I've seen it.
clinical
It's
trial to
fantastic.
make it real.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Well,
that is great. Who is your biggest influence in your career?
oh, I was thinking about that. It's funny. They're often not the people that you think would be in terms of formal mentors. Sometimes they're the person who I admired from afar and came up to me at a conference and said, I read that paper you wrote in
Mm,
blah, blah, blah. That was really interesting. And it was
wow,
like a light goes off and you're like, oh my gosh, somebody actually read something I wrote and they actually came up to tell me that it was interesting. So those are the kinds of people I think who just sort of open the door for you, and they support you. And it's any sponsor, I think, who
mm,
really makes you feel like you can do something or what you did was actually a
wow.
step to something in the future. So there's a lot of people
That's
like that.
beautiful.
Yeah, they're really just lovely moments that give you the nourishment you need again to stick with it.
That is beautiful. What's the best part of the job? 6 months in.
Um, Actually, it's not even 5 months, I will say.
5. Oh, I
It's
miscounted.
it's getting there, yeah, but that's okay. I'm getting to be a senior now. Um, the best part of the job, amazing people, amazing
Mm,
staff, amazing support, colleagues, amazing scientists, and getting like just these unbelievable tutorials that are deep
mm,
dives into the
yeah.
science. So, I sit down with people who are you know, like I mentioned, the CHAV-D group, the HIV vaccine group, I had talking with Ted Pearson and Dennis Burton and um, um, my friend Duke, whose name is escaping me,
You're thinking
who
of
runs
Bart
the
Haynes, I think you
Bart
just said.
Haynes. Yes, yes. I mean, getting to be debriefed with them on the state
Yeah,
of HIV vaccine science, I don't know how it gets any better than that. I keep
yeah,
returning to the nerd quotient. It's very
yeah.
high.
I think that's awesome, and we didn't really get into it and didn't have time, but clearly, and you've said it a number of times that even as we think about the biobehavioral delivery of the things we have, it sounds very clearly that HIV vaccines, TB vaccines, cure is still fundamentally part of the NIH
Absolutely.
priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as we talked about recently, um, with the You're gonna have to remind me of the group's acronym because it's yet another acronym that I've forgotten. But the majority of our budget at the Vaccine Research Center still goes to HIV vaccines. So
Yeah.
I want people to be very clear about that. There has been no shift, and again, no diminution of our
Mm,
commitment in that regard. So.
yeah. That is, and so that's the best part. Wait, biggest surprise so far?
The biggest surprise was actually how friendly people were in DC. It was, after coming from Alabama, where people could not be friendly enough. I was a little surprised to find it like it had a little bit of a Southern vibe. So people have been incredibly welcoming, and so Joe and I've been very happy there.
That is so great. And I think, Washington being friendly to a scientist is a rare thing.
Well, again, it's
And
early days. It's still
it's
honeymoon
early
period,
days.
but I'm hoping we can keep that on.
Enjoy it while you can.
Yep.
And we will certainly be there to help. I do have one other quick question. As you may notice behind me, I'm wondering when I get a Jeanne Marrazzo bobblehead to add to my collection. Is that something that's on the priority list?
Well, since I'm here with 116 of my closest friends, I will divulge that someone did make me one as a going away present, and I was so freaked out by it. I have not looked at it again. So the short answer is no. It's not in the
Okay.
future.
Fair enough. I won't expect it, and that is such such a great gift. I wish I'd thought of it. I should also say, and I meant to say this in the introduction. One of the things that's pretty exciting, just today, in addition to having posted the NIAID strategy request for information, you were listed as one of the 50 on the. You may not even know this yet. Did you know you're on the status list?
No,
Oh my gosh. So I'm gonna actually let me see if I can share my screen for all to
no,
see. Oh, I don't think I
you don't
can.
have to share the screen. You could
So
just tell us.
Stat News, which is actually one of the
Oh,
leading health
oh,
journalist areas, put out today their 50 influential leaders in life sciences, and I'm delighted to know that you are one of those 50. Um,
thank you.
and and I think it's not because of your new job; it's because of a lifelong commitment and a career so well deserved. I know you need to run. Any last thoughts? I guess here's the last one. I'd love that, and then I'll
Mhm,
leave it for you to sum it up. What do you want and need from the advocacy community?
mhm. I think what I want and need is continued open dialogue, and frankly, even when I say confrontation, I mean it in a healthy way. Like the last thing I need, and it's so ironic because the more you climb up in these jobs, the less this happens. The last thing I need is people to sit around the table and agree with me.
Yeah.
I really think that, I don't want people yelling at me for the sake of yelling at me either, but I do think that we really need to be challenged. And sometimes, it's especially when there are perceived power differentials, um, with regard to who's a scientist, who's not, who works here, who doesn't. Um, that can be hard. But one of the things that, I mean, we've learned, I think, incredibly well from this community, this advocacy community,
Mm,
is that dialogue is essential, and it's healthy, and
yeah.
it needs to happen. So I need people to continue to be honest, be vocal, and keep fighting for our ability to keep funding the work, because that continues to be a big challenge.
Jeannie, Dr. Marrazzo, thank you. I can assure you that we will support you and we will challenge you because it's a collective effort. And we've been that way with your predecessor and your colleagues that you now lead at NIAID, and we will continue to do that. NIAID can't do this alone, but nor can advocates. And we really look forward to joining in common cause, pushing each other, calling each other in to make the big decisions that are going to advance to what I think is really the dream you outlined for the trial of the future. Thank you so much. Safe travels to Croy and beyond. And I think I can say that everybody here looks forward to both filling out the request for information, feeding you ideas, and engaging in listening sessions, not just for your strategic plan, but for your
Right.
tenure for as long as it may be. So
Thank
at
you.
NIAID. So thank you
Thanks,
so
Mitchell.
much.
Thank you for everybody for showing up. Really appreciate it. And I hope to see y'all soon.
Take care. All the best.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. And we will get back with answers to questions and follow-ups as best we can. Have great afternoons and evenings.